Welcome to the Freely Rooted Mama podcast. Where I am their mother, I make the choice.
All right, mamas, happy Thursday. Welcome back for another episode. Before I jump into today's topic, I wanted to update you in case you haven't heard that I have an amazing out-of-the-box mama course that I'm creating for you guys. We're going to be talking about anything from conception to pregnancy to birth to motherhood. And I'm bringing on amazing experts everybody from, if you're on Instagram, you can see that I love the nurture neuroscience, the nurture of parenting. She's amazing. So I'm bringing her on to talk about the brain. I'm bringing on a dad expert to talk about how do we do intentional parenting as a father. I'm talking to family therapists around parenting. I'm talking to midwives and doulas around how to be more empowered in your birth and many of the questions that people have. What's a doula versus what's a midwife? How do my appointments go when I'm with a midwife? What if there's an emergency? I'm going to talk about all of these amazing topics that you guys have reached out to me about. I'm so excited for this course. And as I continue to get feedback and add to the course, you'll get those as well. So if you want to stay tuned on that, just make sure you opt in for my newsletter. I'll leave a link below on how you can get into that. Or if you're on my Instagram, you can just go to my link in bio and there's a way to opt in. So that's coming soon, depending on when you're listening to this, hopefully launching in December of 2023. So today's topic that I want to talk about is being in charge of your birth. And I've kind of already talked about this before, but I really want to talk about this concept of informed consent that your practitioners need to be doing, need to be practicing. I'm hoping that a lot of today's world is opting into this, that this is your body and you are in charge of what happens to your body during your birth and your pregnancy. You are responsible for knowing what you want in your pregnancy and your birth. And I know that sounds really harsh, but you are responsible. It is your responsibility to do the research, to be educated on what practices you want to participate in, what you don't want to participate in, and voice that. Because I feel like what used to happen is we'd go into we'd be pregnant, we'd go to have our baby, and we'd leave it up to the doctor to decide. And I think so much research has come out that we are now exposed to, right? We didn't have social media 20 years ago to be talking about these concepts. So people just trusted that their practitioner knew best. And that's not always the case. And it may not be that it's not that they don't know best, but it may not be what you want and what you value and what you believe in. So a perfect example is like circumcision. Like you may live in a belief and a value that no, circumcision is not okay. And maybe for religious reasons, you believe, yes, it is. But that's your choice to make. You need to be informed and you need to take responsibility. By the way, if you want a great resource on circumcision, on the conversation of circumcision, I did do an episode on it, but Luke Story has a great podcast about circumcision. I would highly recommend somebody contemplating it, listen to. Okay, but back to my point. Back to my point is that you need to be responsible. So two situations have happened as of late. That one I heard through a friend, and the other one I actually knew the girl. And so these are just examples of what I'm talking about. So the first was a lady who's pregnant, and her OBGYN said that her baby was measuring too small and that they needed to go in and schedule out a C-section and get baby out. And so she was really upset, really overwhelmed. And the conversation I had with her was, that is overwhelming. It's overwhelming to be in an appointment and hear something like that, or that my baby's too big, or whatever it is, XYZ. And as a mom or a mom to be, you start to feel overwhelmed and anxious. Of course, the safety of your baby is the most important thing. And what are they basing that off of? So for example, with this woman, she said, I think my friend had asked, okay, well, can we do another ultrasound and just see where things are in a couple weeks? And they're like, oh, we could, but we're not going to be able to schedule an ultrasound for another 6 weeks. Okay, well, my logical brain goes, so they're not so concerned that they wouldn't be willing to schedule an ultrasound in 6 weeks. Like if there was a massive problem, they would be saying, we need to do this right now. And in that case, you might want to consider what it is that they're saying. But if they're just saying, well, we need to schedule out a C-section in the next couple of weeks, Or you can do another ultrasound in 6 weeks. That doesn't sound like an emergency to me. But it's hard in the moment, I know, when all your emotions are rising. So a great key thing to do is, great, thank you for that information. I need to go home and think about this, talk to my partner about it. Can we please schedule an appointment with you in the next couple of days? That gives you time to go home, to really process what they've said, to do some research, and to let that logical brain come back online to where you can start thinking about questions, because the power is asking questions. So what I told her to do was to go back and say, okay, well, what are your concerns? What are the pros of us going in for a C-section? What are the cons? I want to know what the consequences are that you see if I don't do this C-section. Ask the questions, because sometimes, this sounds horrible, but sometimes hospitals have a timeline. Sometimes doctors have a timeline, like the OBGYN might be going on vacation. And so I know this sounds horrible, but this literally does happen, where they might say, well, I'm going to be out of town, so let's just go ahead and schedule you for an induction or schedule you for a C-section. Your baby's measuring too small, so let's schedule you for an induction. Let's schedule you for a C-section. Your baby's measuring too large. Let's schedule you. You know that they make a lot more money off of you if you go in for a C-section or you get induced than if you don't. I'm not saying that I want to be very, very clear. Not all nurses and doctors are doing that. But there are some, hospitals are looking for money. Hospitals need money. I know this sounds horrible, but I've heard so many stories, you guys. It's insane. So many personal, straight up stories from women about this stuff happening. And then a friend of mine who's a doula just had a client who was having her baby at a hospital where there were multiple issues where the nurses and the doctors weren't asking and kind of kept pushing against what the mom wanted. So for example, they wanted to do continuous monitoring when she only wanted to do intermittent monitoring. And they just kept pushing and pushing and pushing it until the mom finally just gave in and said, okay. And then mom has baby, and then they go ahead and they hook her up and they start giving her Pitocin without asking her. And in her birth plan, she says no Pitocin after birth. And just for some of you guys that may not know, they usually give Pitocin after birth to help with the delivery of the placenta. You can deliver the placenta without Pitocin, by the way, especially if you just gave birth to your baby naturally. But they will do that to help speed up that process. Without asking, they did it. And so this is where you need to understand as a mom, especially and with your birth team, that they need to ask you what you want. And you need to make sure it's very clear in your birth plan and that you are very clear with your provider. This is what I want. And if your provider is not on board, I would go seek a new provider. And I know that sounds like scary, especially if you're about to give birth in a couple months. I told my friend they said the baby was too small. I told her this too. I said, can you go get somebody new? Go seek a second opinion. You can always get a second opinion. But most of the time I find that we haven't, as women, been empowered to take control of our birth and of our pregnancy. And so when doctors come in and they tell us this, we get scared. And of course, we don't want anything bad to happen to our baby, so we don't question it. But I would really start advising people to question it. If it doesn't feel right, if it doesn't align with your beliefs, your values, your birth plan, question it. Get a second opinion. And this goes to the same true for midwives too. You can always go seek a new midwife. In fact, one of the midwife centers around here are taking on clients that maybe they need to switch and, they're going to have a baby in like 3 weeks. There are options out there if you do the research and you take the time. And I promise you that you stepping into your power and taking charge of what you want for your birth is so important, because if you don't, and I won't say this with 100% certainty, but if you don't, there's a possibility that after you birth your baby, that there will be some stored trauma emotion around that, around the fact that you didn't seek a second opinion or you didn't follow your gut or that mother intuition that each one of us has. So this is just a spiel to know that, yes, no matter who your practitioner is, whether it's a midwife, whether it's an OBGYN, they should be asking you before they do anything. They want to do a cervical exam, they should be asking you rather than just saying, okay, hop up on the bed, put your feet up, and we're going to do a cervical exam. And you have permission to ask why. Stop and ask them, why do you want to do this? Tell me the reasons. What are the benefits? And it's so important that your birth team or your partner are on the same page with you, so that if you are not in the mind to ask those questions, which most of us, like the woman who they just gave Pitocin to, she just had a baby. Like, it's a big accomplishment. It's emotionally, it's physically hard. That's a time where you want to make sure that your partner, and not saying that this woman didn't, but that's a time where you want your partner to step in and say, no, on our birth plan, she's not getting Pitocin. What are you doing? That's really where you want the people around you to be on the same page. And so with the woman who they told her baby was too small, I believe she got a second opinion. They didn't have the same thoughts. And she's like, all right, well, we're not scheduling an induction. We're not getting a C-section. She had her baby healthy, happy, and everything was fine. And baby came when baby was supposed to come. Now, that's not always the case. Like, sometimes there are situations where, a medical intervention is necessary. I don't want to disregard why we have interventions or why we have things like epidurals or Pitocin or something. There are cases sometimes when those are needed, but they're needed for an emergency. And if your provider is telling you, in like 3-4 weeks, whenever you get around to it or whenever fits in my schedule, or we can do that in 6 weeks, it's not an emergency. I'm sorry, but it's not an emergency. And so that's really where accept the emotions that you're having when that provider tells you those things. Go home and come back with questions. I really encourage people to go home and have some time to think and to let the emotions ride through, so that the logic brain can come online and you can actually think through some questions that you want to bring up to that provider. I hope that's helpful. Women, we are amazing. We can create babies. We can deliver babies. Follow that motherly intuition that's in each one of us. Stand true to what you want and what your beliefs and your values are, and never be afraid to question what it is that they're asking you to do. I hope that helps. Have a wonderful, wonderful week.